I purchased a house in March of this year, and it took me 3 months to evict the tenant. And why? Well, I when I bought this home, I got a really good value on it, of course, and it all got down to calculated risk. What's the problem? Why am I getting such a good value on this house? Well, the house had an occupant in place, and it wasn't just an occupant, it was a squatter. Someone living there, they did not have a lease, and utilities were not in their name, and they were quite aggressive, I would say, and it was problematic because what happened is the former owner had inherited the house. It was a house that was owned by his father, and he inherited the home, but when he inherited the home, there were squatters living in his father's house. And his father had his house completely furnished. He had his pictures of his family, all kinds of personal items were left in this house, and the squatters had taken control of this property. And this was very problematic to the former owner who inherited, because now he lives out of state and he's trying to settle the situation with his father, grieving over the loss, and he has no access into a house that his father owned. So he sold me the house, purchased the house, and I had to take the calculated risk of somebody living in the house that did not have a lease. Now, I wasn't concerned because I've done a lot of evictions in my time. In fact, I've worked for banks and handling the sale of their bank-owned foreclosures. And in my career, I've handled probably over 300 bank evictions where I was the person in control of the property after the home was evicted. I was there to meet the police, and so I know eviction. You know, I understand the process. And typically when you start an eviction, 90% of the time the tenant leaves. It's not a problem. They move out, I show up for the eviction, the house is empty, and we can move forward from there. But the standard protocol with the lenders was to always offer the occupant cash for keys. It's just cheaper, it's easier, the process goes a lot smoother, everyone ends up. Cash for keys can be a win-win solution for both the occupant and the landlord, because you save on legal fees, you get possession right away, and preferably you get your home in better condition than you would if you go through the whole eviction process. So I purchased this home in March. First thing I did is I went to the occupants, who were not tenants, they were squatters. Now, in Florida, thank goodness, there's a law that just passed on July 1st that does not give squatters the same rights as it has in the past, and it's easier to get a squatter out of the house. But that's not true throughout the United States. This is a law that's in place in Florida, and quite frankly, having gone through this whole experience, I would never buy real estate outside of Florida in a state that doesn't give landlords priority over squatters. That is absolutely ridiculous because you lose your rights. And what's really sad is squatters have more rights than owners and tenants. And I learned that the hard way when I tried to negotiate with my squatters. The home that I just purchased, went to the occupant and said, look, I will give, there's two people in the house. It was a boyfriend, girlfriend. I'll give you both $2,000 if you can move out in a couple weeks. And they said, yes, we will accept your cash for keys offer. But they were playing games with me because I got the paperwork ready for them to sign. I waited, and they didn't sign it. They had no intention of ever signing. They were just buying time, and it cost me, legal fees to get this in motion. And I'm kind of mad because these people are playing games. There's always a story, right? Meanwhile, they're in my house. I'm asking them, can I see it? Can I actually walk in the home? I own it. Like, why would you want to see your house? Well, because I'm the owner. I'm trying to figure this out, right? And they wouldn't let me in my own house, dictating to me how this situation is going there. Now, they had been there for some time. So how did these squatters get in the house? Well, that's a real issue. And it's also kind of an epidemic here in Florida because I'm seeing a lot of this, and it's a very sad story because you have an elderly person living in a house and they need help. So they get a caregiver, and the caregiver helps them. Now, if the caregiver moves in the house, this is where it gets problematic because that caregiver can become the squatter. The caregiver moved in this house, supposedly was taking care of this man that passed away. She moves her boyfriend in the house, and the owner, the elderly gentleman, passed away. So now they're squatting the home. They have no lease, they're in possession of the property, they're not even paying the utility bills, and they have possession of this property. So now I own the property, I'm trying to negotiate with them to get them out of my house, right? I offer them $2,000 each, $4,000, move out. They don't accept it. So now I have to go through an eviction process. Now eviction is relatively easy in Florida. It's easy to evict tenants when you have a lease. When you don't have a lease, and this was prior to July 1, it was a much more complicated situation because the first order was I had to have an attorney basically cancel a lease that did not exist, which gave them 30 days, and they were fighting me the whole time with this eviction, right? So this eviction took 3 months, and if I calculate the expense of legal fees, lost income, this eviction cost me about $10,000, and that was the worst eviction I've ever gone through dealing with a squatter. And I learned the hard way that squatters have more rights than tenants and even owners. Then how is that so? Because if you're a landlord and you rent your property to a tenant, you will get, normally you'll ask for a security deposit. You know these tenants, you have copies of their driver's license, you can track them. And that's easier to also sue them when you're done with the process for a deficiency judgment. And from that you can garnish their wages and also their incomes that they have. Not so much with a squatter. Plus, if a squatter, they don't have anything, right? So this saga went on for 3 months, and it was constantly frustrating trying to get these people out because I don't know what they're doing in the house, and they won't let me in the home. And if it was a tenant, I would have rights to go in. A squatter, no, I don't have rights. All I have to do is legally evict them. So it was interesting because right from the get-go, the squatter called me and said the power was turned off and I need to turn the power back on or she's going to call the police. And I said, wait a minute. I never had the power on. The power was on in the former owner's name. And if the person I purchased the house through, if he turned the power off, that is not, I have no issue with that. I am the new owner, but I'm not turning the power back on. And nasty, nasty text, but she actually said she went to the police to try to have me arrested. It made me think, well, wait a minute. What about the water? The water's not, whose name is the water on? And I went to the water company and I said, whose name is in the water? And it was on in the name of the former owner who had passed away about a year ago, but the water bill was current. So I'm like, well, who's paying the water bill then? I'm not paying it. The water company confirmed that the bill was being sent to the house. So they were going in the mail and they were opening the mail of the former deceased owner and they were paying his water bill so they could maintain water. But they were also opening all his other mail. And we found this out through me discussing it with the former owner's son, that they were not only going through all his stuff and taking all his stuff and selling it and getting rid of it, they were also opening his mail. So I went to the police and I said, look, these people clearly do not have a lease on the house. The water bill is not even in their name, but yet the water has been paid for the past year. I don't know how that could be possible when the bills go to the house. And the police officer said, look, until July 1, I can't do anything. I can't evict these people. But after July 1 in Florida, we can go there and we can take these people out because they are squatting. But he goes, wait, I have one possible solution here that may work. And what that turned out is, if you're a squatter, chances are you have a criminal record, right? Well, he checked and said, look, if there is a arrest warrant for these occupants, this is going to be slam dunk. I can arrest them, you get your house right now. So he checked, and there wasn't. So that did not work. But I did find out that the water could not be turned on this house unless the occupants had a lease or they were the owner and they proved that they were the owner. So the water could not be kept in their name without that information. So the water was turned off. And then I get a call from the squatter again, who is avoiding me at all costs. They will not talk to me, they won't let me in the home. And they're like, you need to turn the water on in this house or we are gonna have you arrested. I'm like, under what pretense am I now the criminal when you're living in my house not paying rent? And they said, Florida Statutes 83, it says that a landlord cannot turn off the water to a tenant for non-payment of rent. I said, that may be true, but you're not a tenant. And number one, the water is not in my name. So I'm not turning the water on. And I got all these nasty texts. I mean, the only time I would hear from this squatter is when they want something, right? Turn the water on. Well, the water company wouldn't turn the water back on. And these people are living in this house without water. And I figured that would work to my advantage, but not really. The house just became more gross, right? So from that situation, they stayed there. Well, the eviction went on, and finally, eviction day happens, and I'm gonna meet the police at the house. And I keep communicating with the lady, and she's the squatter, and you know, I'm hearing all kinds of personal information. I don't care, you know what? Move on. And we're there the day of eviction, the time that's there. And I walk in the house, and I have my crew ready to start cleaning out the house, and the squatter's telling me, look, if you can just give me 3 more hours. I'm like, you've had 3 months to move out of this house. I'm not giving you 3 hours. In fact, the police officer's right here. If you need to leave my property, if you come back to my property, I'm gonna have you arrested. And I was gonna film that whole episode because I was mad, but for the next half hour, it was nothing but screaming and crying and what a victim she is and everything else, and all this information when she's had 3 months to move out of the house, never paid a dime, cost me $10,000. And this house was a hoarder house, and we start throwing everything away. Well, she's panicking as we're taking her stuff. Actually, it was the former owner's stuff out of the house in bags to the curb, and she can hang out on the street, but she can't come back in the house. And that's exactly what she did. Is she hung out at the street, going through the bags of stuff we took out of the house, putting it into storage. And the weird thing is, she's been there almost every day for the past 3 weeks. Even after we took possession of the home, she is still at the street some days going through the stuff. Well, I'm now working on my 4th dumpster to get everything out of that house. And, you know, I feel sorry for her and I don't. You know, it's one of those things that I did not create the situation in life that she did that led her to where she's at. And I'll help anybody that needs help, provided they're able to help themselves. And she's taken advantage of me, and it's one of these things that she would go into a homeless situation, or I understand she found somebody to live with. But some takeaways from that are, you know, if you're living in Florida and you need help and these people move in your house, you know, they could become squatters. And if that house goes to your children one day, you've given them a problem. It's not so easy to evict somebody, you know, with the pretense that they've been living there from the former owner. And it was very expensive. It was very costly. I did get possession of the house. We're fixing it up. It's going to go on the market. It's going to look shiny. But that was the worst eviction I've ever gone through. And I talked to the police officer about it, and he mentioned that, you know, evictions are up. And what's crazy right now is more and more people are staying. They are not afraid of the police showing up and taking their stuff. So the eviction situation is getting worse. And right before I did this eviction, I did one for a bank on a bank-owned property on a $1 million+ home in a country club. And the former owner, tenant, had been there at least 2 years. I was told 10 years. They hadn't paid their payment in 10 years. I can't verify that. But I know that they hadn't paid for the last 2 years. I've offered them cash for keys. And the day of eviction, this guy, the former owner, was in complete denial of the story. And he had a beautiful home full of stuff, and we put it all to the curb in the country club and got possession. But he's arguing with the police officer how he's the victim, that this was not a just system, when I believe he hadn't made a payment on that house in 10 years, or at least a couple years, and yet he's the victim. Who pays for that when somebody else doesn't pay? How does that money get absorbed, right? Well, I think we pay it. So that was a crazy situation, but evictions seem to be getting a little worse because they're not as easy as they used to be. And if you're going to allow somebody to move in your home, make sure they're not going to become a squatter. So in closing, my name is Troy Funk. I am the broker owner of Realty One in Sarasota, Florida. And my website, troyfunk.com, will give you access to homes for sale throughout the entire state, as well as our corporate company, Realty One Group. We have 29 offices in the state of Florida. So if you're looking for real estate anywhere in the state of Florida, I can be a resource to you. I appreciate your time today, and I wish you well.